Well, good afternoon, friends. My name is Jeffrey Moore, and this is Reverend Heather Goddess Moore. We're two of the pastors at St. Stephen United Methodist Church, and this is our first broadcast of Face to Face with Racism. We're glad that you've joined us this afternoon and to talk about colorblindness as covert racism. I want to welcome our conversation partners today in no particular order except going around on my screen. We have Darrell St. Romain. If you were with us last week, you met Darrell, who joined us for our debrief from 2 weeks ago. Darrell is the director of music at Mary Immaculate in Farmers Branch, Texas. And Christian Watkins, Minister Christian Watkins, is the Windland Fellow for Faith and Justice at the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church.
Wow.
It's a very long business card.
Good to be here. It's good. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. And then we have Michael Carr. Hello. Michael is the organist at St. Stephen United Methodist. So for those of you who are members of the community, you recognize him. And then we have Amy Ann Bailey, who is one of the librarians at Mesquite High School here in town. So we're going to start with some opening thoughts, and we'll just go, I guess, in the order that I introduced you. So we'll start with Darrell. That's all right?
Yes, that's fine. And thank you, Jeffrey, for having me on again this week. So the topic at hand is colorblindness. So we get this a lot where you hear people say, well, I don't see color and everybody is the same and we're all one human race. And that's a good statement, but it doesn't pan out that way in reality. Because when you tell me you don't see color, then you don't see who I am. You don't see my culture. You don't see shared experiences from other people who look like me when you say I don't see color. So it's a term that makes whites feel very comfortable, but to a person of color, it's very off-putting at the same time, because you're telling me you don't see color because there's something wrong with my color. And so how do we address this? How do we go forward? Because in essence, it's a nice term if everybody was an individual and we treated all individuals the same, but that's not how the world and reality works.
Okay.
Christian, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you again for having me in part of the conversation, and I echo what Darrell has offered. I saw over the past couple of weeks, people have been coming up with very good protest signs, and the whole scene of transformation and revolution happening before our eyes has really opened a lot of people's eyes. But I saw this one particular protest sign held by two people. I believe it was a white man and a black woman. No, it was a white and a black woman that had on their signs colored palettes, right? One of them was basically mute tones, ranging from white to grayish, off-white, pearl white, that kind of thing. They were made out into a grid like a makeup palette. And on the other sign, it had the gradations from peach to the darkest African-American tone that makeup could be seen in. And it perfectly displayed how colorblindness really does not allow someone to see the systemic issues aligned with person's skin tones, because we all suffer from it, right? From the darkest of dark to the darkest of black to the lightest of any human skin tone, we're systematically oppressed differently, but we're all suffering from the same institutions. And to relegate oneself to not seeing the color does not allow that person to actually understand the issues that affect that body. And we see that in every aspect of life. And that's my thought on colorblindness and the need to be aware of color, because that is someone's personal experience, right? So I'll stop there.
Okay. Michael, you and I have talked some about your experience growing up in the segregated South.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I grew up in southeastern Virginia in the 60s and went through desegregation as I entered high school. So my high school years were the transition of school systems, bringing the blacks into the whites and mixing us up. And it was very difficult for me because I saw the treatment that my black friends received simply because of the color of their skin. And I was a closet gay man. So I knew that if I had a neon sign across my forehead that said gay or queer, that I would experience equally the hostilities that they received, if not worse. And so it was just very, very difficult for me to go through that experience of hostility towards my fellow friends simply because of the color of their skin. Daryl made a comment earlier about we don't see color. For me, it's I see the color, but I see the color as a blend, a mix of all the other colors, and they're all one. So they are all part of the same palette of color. So when I say that I don't see color in that regard, I don't see that they're different than I am.
Amy Ann, like I said before we started, one of the reasons that we invited you to join us today was because you talked specifically about how it was growing up being taught to be colorblind. And so we'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to talk about this really important issue. So I grew up in the 90s, and that was a very common phrase. I think just from doing my own self-work in anti-racist, just trying to be better, I find that was kind of when we talked about being post-racial. And so I think the colorblindness theory was a nod to showing that we were beyond the racial issues that have plagued our country since the beginning. And so I always, and I just have to say, I don't think that phrase comes out of ill intent, but it does have detrimental harm to people. And so that is why we have to stop saying that. So I grew up in Mesquite, Texas, and then I went off to Texas A&M, very conservative, middle class, white, just did really in a bubble. And then I started working at Mesquite ISD. And over my 22 years, our community has gotten so much more diverse. And I started to notice that I was one of the only white people in a room, in my classroom. I was in the minority. And so I just started having conversations with my students surrounding race. I was an English teacher before I was a librarian. So we would talk about life. And history and all of these things. And I really strive to make my classroom safe. And so when you do that as a teacher, kids say things. And I never wanted to shut down their voices. So I just really listened. And a lot of times kids would tell me just things that they were experiencing as people of color. And I realized that when I said I didn't see color, I was saying, just like everyone has mentioned, that means I didn't see them. Mm-hmm. And that was when I just kind of went into an existential crisis from all of these years of thinking I was doing good when actually I was doing harm. And so I just started doing some self-work on racism. And let me just tell you, if you get comfortable reading about racism, then you're not doing the work right. It is an extremely uncomfortable, hard process. And the more uncomfortable you get, I think it means you are peeling back layers. And so people, especially white people who want to start this work, and it's crucial that we do, you're going to be uncomfortable. And that's okay. You need to be. So that's one thing that I want to address. There's a lot of things to talk about with that. White guilt, white fragility. We have to address those issues, but we have to stop saying that we don't see color, because that is causing harm.
I appreciate you pointing out that I think for the majority of people who employ the strategy of colorblindness, they are doing so from a posture of good intent. They think that they're taking a step forward in terms of, as you said, being post-racial, of being egalitarian. And so we, at the same time that we unmask the harm that this does, we need to acknowledge that for most people, I won't say everyone, but for most people, there's not ill intent behind it. Christian.
Allow me to. I first affirm what Amy Ann has said. What Amy Ann said, because if you listen to the trajectory of her self-discovery that she just laid out, she didn't start having the new revelations until she started having conversations and was able to empathize with those who were not seen, right? But I do want to push back on the idea of it coming from a not so bad place, from a place of good intent. One of the quotes that comes to mind is that good intentions pave the road to hell. Mm-hmm. And I do want to put that out there because I know it's not everybody, but there are some people who would rather shield themselves and think a certain way, and not want to see the colors, not want to see the experiences that other folks are having, and it's easier to shy away from it and just put up a blanket statement, I don't see color, and leave it alone. That keeps them comfortable, right? But it's not until you have those critical conversations with those persons that you do come to the realization that there is something behind the veil and there's something that you're missing. And then it becomes incumbent upon us in order to do the work, if you're really serious about being in community and developing love and developing beloved community, as MLK says, or pursuing that kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Mm-hmm. And there was something else that I wanted to bring up, but it just escaped my memory. But I'll probably think of it later.
I think Christian, it's a really good point. I think that a lot of times, while we believe as white people, we believe that our intention is good. The intention comes from a selfish place. Mm-hmm. It's good because it protects us. A little bit from, and so instead what Amy Ann does is she steps into that discomfort and starts having those conversations, and that it's hard, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, but it brings us past that point of our intention being personally driven and more communally driven, which is, I think, the direction we want to move. Yeah. Darrell, do you have a question that or a topic you want to bring into the group?
Yes, when talking about colorblindness, we should also mention the fact of colorism within a race, because as I look at Christian, he's my brother, but I also notice that he has a darker skin tone than I am. So he's going to have a different experience than I have with the lighter skin tone. And so, and whites prefer the lighter skin tone than the darker skin tone. So Christian might have a more hostile experience in the same situation where I will have an easier experience.
Really?
So really, very much so. Very much.
That's it. That's good. I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually triggered like part of the conversation I wanted to like poke at there. I like trouble in the waters, like James Cones used to say. So, yeah, that brown paper bag test that happens within the Black community. That used to happen within the Black community. That's not as prevalent anymore. But there was such a time when the house slaves and the field slaves would compare themselves to each other, and it morphed into what we saw in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, where there was a brown paper bag test in order to get into certain societies, certain Black societies. It was an inner African American community type thing, where if you were darker than a brown paper bag, you were seen as less than. There were certain characteristics and characterizations that would be placed upon you. And then if you were lighter than the brown paper bag, you could get into other societies, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's all steeped within that systematic hierarchy of racism, right? So go ahead.
No, keep going.
So even within the Black community and within other minority communities, because it happens in South America as well, and in other countries, there is that issue, that systematic racism that's ingrained in every aspect of life that has to be overcome. And it all starts with the unraveling of the idea of whiteness and the structures and institutions that's been made to support that racial hierarchy. Now stop.
Yes.
So I don't want to put Michael, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you seem to have an aha moment there when Darrell said that he and Christian would have different experiences.
I had not thought of that. I had not realized that it was at that degree, that the color of your skin, your Blackness, determined different experiences. It makes sense, I guess, in some way, but that was a little alarming.
Yeah. So Michael, you and I have talked about the concept of erasure that Darrell talked about at the beginning and Christian echoed, that to not see color is a sense of erasure, or brings about a kind of erasure. And we've talked about that in terms of your own identity as a gay man.
Yes.
That having worked your life to come out of the closet, for someone to not see your gayness would be a kind of erasure that would force you back in the closet, right?
Yes.
In a sense. I'm wondering if I would be interested in Christian and Darrell's perspective on this. I wonder if, for Michael, the colorism could have an analog in terms of people who are really, really gay. I mean, whose mannerisms, are just over the top, and whose mannerisms are more closer to passing. so their
Christian.
their experience as gay people is very different, right?
Certainly.
Is that a fair analogy to draw?
Yes, I think definitely. I think that there's the
Well, I'm
stereotype.
asking black people. Sorry. No, but Michael, go ahead, and then.
No, I can see the relationship, though, that there's the stereotypical queen, very effeminate, that represents, and then there are those that you would not suspect if you socialized with them or around. So certainly they're going to be treated quite differently.
Mm-hmm. And now, as you make that connection, could you see how, if I'm in a certain circle, that if I'm among all white people, how I will be more treated better than if Christian was just in that circle? Because his skin tone is going to pop more than my skin tone is going to pop. And so if your analogy works, that Christian would be the queen, and I would be the one who was, I didn't mean it like that, Christian, but I would be the one who was passing. I mean, I don't operate like that. But that is that the perception? Is that what is going on in your mind when you get this aha moment about light skin and dark skin?
Well, I've just never treated anyone differently because of the color of their skin. I'd like to think that that's the case. So it doesn't matter whether you have a darker skin or a lighter skin, I see you as the same. So, but I can appreciate that, yes, possibly you would experience less of a difference of a circumstance than Christian would.
I want Christian to get to whatever thought popped into his head, but I would really like Amy Ann, if you have anything to chime in on the same.
Can we go hear from Christian first? Sorry.
Oh, sure.
I was just going to say, I love it when connections are drawn and experiences are learned from, especially when you see something that happens in another part of culture, and then it pops into your head. The revelation comes where, this happens in another place in life, and we're all talking about the same issue of passability. Passability comes from, or in terms of African Americans throughout the history of America. Let's go back to the slave plantation. The lighter you are, the more prone you are to working in the house with massa, serving his food, being with or raising his kids, cleaning up around the house. You might be a personal valet, that kind of thing. And if you're light enough, you can pass as one of his children or one of his relatives or what have you. So that's what causes certain people to align themselves with whiteness, because of the fact it symbolizes an achievement of status. Whereas the field Negroes, usually darker, more rough, more their hair is coarser, they're more prone to being good field hands. Those are the ones with lesser value, but they are valued, but monetarily. They're valued as property. They're valued as people's toys. They're used, right? And that's where we see where even in police brutality issues, I want to push it there. There is a devaluation of darker skin life, and that's where you get the demonization of people to come from. Because every single person that has been cut down, who has been murdered by police, they've always demonized that person. They've always gone into their history and whatnot and found the deepest, darkest secrets or the most absurd things. And that comes from a villainization of the darker skinned persons, right? And that's also where we get the pro-black marching for justice, and those that lean towards the more passable places, like Candace Owens, who's playing a part in the codification of these racial gradations that still go on today. So
preach it.
Yeah, I know that you guys, you all can't necessarily see the comments that are happening in the Facebook Live, so I encourage you when we're done with this to go back and see, because you're getting lots of preach.
Amy Ann.
Amy Ann.
Yes. So I first learned about colorism from my students of color. That I noticed them comparing skin tones and talking derogatorily, I guess is a word, about darker skinned students, and it really bothered me. But before I knew better, I would think, oh, I can't ask questions because it is racist to acknowledge race. And that is an old thought, and I think a lot of white people, the colorblindness feeds that idea that if you acknowledge someone's race, you are being racist, which is not true. So I just want you to think about if you've heard someone, especially a white person, say, I don't mean to be racist, but he's a black man, which that is not a racist statement. It is not racist to say that is a black man. I've actually stopped my children from saying that because I've noticed them starting to say that. And I'm like, oh, no. It is fine to say that's what acknowledge someone's race. It is how you treat that person or your white supremacy coming out that you think you're somehow better in all those deep-seated ways that white supremacy feeds every system that we know. So I mean, this is all just, it's like here, and this is what I was talking about with the discomfort. It is in everything. Like, we're talking about colorism, we're talking about racism, we're talking about homophobia, we're talking about everything. Like, if you tackle this work, it is interconnected in everything. And so I love this conversation because that's what it's showing, that it just keeps going and going. So if you're going to go there, you better be ready to go there because you're going to have to come to terms with a lot of things.
There's a lot of intersectionality.
Yes, that is the correct term. Thank you.
And so our time has gone quickly.
So quickly.
I want to acknowledge, because Darlene St. Romain called me out on using the word passing, which I put in scare quotes. But I want to acknowledge, one, that I use the term, but that the whole concept of passing is bound up in white normativity, right? The goal is to get to whiteness as close as possible.
To assimilate.
Yeah, right. And so I appreciate her calling me out on that. Yeah, I have a friend who she is African American. Her husband is white, and she likes to refer to her husband as melanin challenged. So, rather than, I just need to start looking at myself as challenged in terms of my melanin rather than the other way around. So
I think, Amy Ann, I really appreciated what you said at the end. This is really difficult work. This requires us as white people in America, but especially in Mesquite, and as members and people affiliated with St. Stephen, it requires us to peel back some layers that are not always going to be easy. And so I want to encourage you all to proceed with grace and proceed with an open heart and be kind to yourself, but don't take your foot off the gas.
Read books.
Read books, yes.
That's beautiful, Amy Ann. That is so beautiful.
Yeah, take the time to care for yourself.
It has Post-its.
You have so many Post-its. Oh my gosh.
And actually, I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to say that the colorblindness issue actually comes from a twisting of Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. And in this book, the author, Robin DiAngelo, she actually goes into that and talks about how the quote, "We need to judge people by the not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character," that is kind of where the colorblindness mentality was lifted from. And Dr. King says, well, that's not what he meant, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to dig into this, she's got a whole chapter, and it's going to get you, but this is the work of me.
Yeah.
This is a good place to start if you're serious, and hopefully, we have to be. So good place to start.
We're going to be starting a book study at St. Stephen on Robin's book, White Fragility, later in the summer.
Wonderful.
So this is not the end of the conversation. We will be back here next week to continue the conversation. Do we know what our topic is next week? That's all right. Look for a posting later today or tomorrow.
White privilege.
Oh, white privilege. Next week, our topic will be white privilege. So
They ain't ready, Jeffrey. They ain't ready.
I know. They're not ready.
They're not ready.
They're not ready.
Throughout this week, we will be posting and sending out different resources regarding colorblindness. So there will be some articles and videos and things that you can continue the work of learning about colorblindness. And yes, we do need more dialogue on this, but it was really important for you to dialogue with people outside of Facebook Live. And these sessions are meant to be jumping off points for more conversation. So definitely take that. And again, don't take your foot off the gas.
All right. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.